Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. We are glad you joined us today, the day before the Labor Day weekend. So good to have you with us. Hope you've got a wonderful weekend planned. Today, our 73rd episode, Friday, September 3rd. We've got the COVID news as usual today. After that, we're going to talk about Comirnaty. You've heard about it. You've heard about the FDA's approval. And if you know us here on the show and at Into Being, you know that we love to get into the actual details of what actually got said by FDA. So we're going to take you through some of the documents surrounding that vaccine approval. After that, I've got a little bit of news about CDRH, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, and their new 510K tracking system, which is really cool, and they've just opened that up. So we'll talk more about that. After that, I'm joined for the pitch party round 4 by Gina Adams of Wareologie, and she'll be pitching today to kick off our Q3 pitch party. And after that, as usual, Q&A and time for community announcements if anybody has those. But again, we're so glad you are here today before this Labor Day weekend. I got to tell you, when we were doing August, you may have noticed I wasn't in the studio. That's because the family and I were traveling out west. We had an opportunity to get away. There's some of the family in Yellowstone National Park, here in the Sisters Wilderness in Oregon, standing on top of a mountain. Here in the Badlands, we got to do the classic American vacation, very thankful for that. So if you noticed a little bit of a difference in our venue for the shows, that's because we were doing it from the road. Now I get to share just a few pictures of that with you. So thanks for your patience. I'm glad the connection worked all the way across the country. We've proven once again that remote working does work. Back to COVID Connect, COVID metrics and vaccine distribution. Our data, as always, coming from covid.cdc.gov. The community transmission rate in the country looks about like it did last week. It's at the highest level. Everything is red. Only a few places in perhaps Nebraska and New Mexico that are not at that high level. So it's transmitting very, very highly in terms of infections. In Michigan, the same. There's not a county in the state that's not transmitting at a high or substantial level. And we're seeing on the right dropping off into Michigan's, shall we say, third peak or trough, as it's shown on that graphic. Why does it matter? You hear in the news about hospital admissions, and it's been a number of times on the show, we've had doctors on who have noted to us that a hospital, to stay profitable, needs to run about 80 out of 100 beds full in order to really stay profitable. Well, the counties in red on this graphic are basically 20 beds full per 100 with COVID patients. And so what that means is it's red because basically we've filled up every bed in the hospital. So any red county, those last 20 beds that they keep for surges that they don't keep full, those are getting filled up any place you have a county that's showing red. That's basically the upshot of that. A lot more in the south now. We will see where that goes. Thankfully, Michigan not seeing the same level of hospitalizations that places in the south are. The new cases are trending upwards, continue to trend upwards, although looking just before the show, that in the US does seem to be starting to taper off as a whole, but in Michigan continues to climb. The testing positivity rate is starting to cap over a little bit, which is great news. In terms of deaths, not much of an uptick, which we can all be thankful for. Although I have to say we lost a family friend the last couple weeks to COVID, so not without passing from this. In terms of hospital admissions in the state of Michigan, we are seeing the third wave, but it certainly doesn't appear to be peaking the way the first two did. Good news there. Vaccinations headed upwards since the approval, which we're going to talk about a little bit more today. Nowhere near the April levels that we saw, but definitely continuing to climb. And this graphic that we've talked about a number of times, again, provided by CDC, and this one focused on the state of Michigan, looking at whether or not there is a correlation between the percent of the population that is fully vaccinated and the number of cases per 100,000 people in the last 7 days. This is on a per county basis. And as this progresses, I think what you're seeing is that there's not a whole lot of correlation here. We can find the very populous counties that are highly vaccinated suffering many, many cases. We can also see the counties that have much lower vaccination rates also getting hit. So not a lot of correlation that we're seeing in this graph. And that brings us to Comirnaty, the vaccine approved by FDA from Pfizer and BioNTech. I have to say, this is not legal advice and this is not medical advice. We just want to do today a review of the actual documentation. If you know us here at Into Being and on MedTech Crossroads, you know that we love to get down to what FDA actually said, what actually happened under the hood. That's what is really interesting. And oftentimes the news headlines cover or obscure that. So we're going to take you right to some of the documents that FDA issued to Pfizer and BioNTech and look and see what they actually said during the approval. With that, I'm going to stop this share and we're going to do a different share to take you to the actual documents that FDA has sent. Of course, these are publicly available documents. And we'll start with this one. This is the BLA approval. Now, if you haven't heard of a BLA, it's a biologics license application. For those of you who are familiar with the show and familiar with much of our discussion about medical devices, this may be an unfamiliar term. But it's issued by CBER, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. And it's an approval for a biologic because, of course, the Comirnaty vaccine is a biologic. It was received on May 18th by the agency, so it took them about 4 months to turn it around, which is exceptionally fast. And this approval is to BioNTech manufacturing through Pfizer. Now, I'm going to scroll down here to some interesting subsections of this. I think it's common knowledge at this point, but let's just highlight it. There's really going to be two things that we're talking about through these documents. There's two areas of interest. One is pediatrics, and of course pediatrics usually defined up through age 17, as well as this question about myocarditis and pericarditis. Fortunately, FDA is thinking about all this, and they've put a lot in this document and these other documents, which really lay it out pretty plainly. So this isn't something to be speculating a lot about. It's also not something to be panicking about the vaccine. The risks that FDA has seen, they've put in here. The ones that they didn't see, they've said, hey, we're not seeing the risks there. So this is approved for individuals 16 years of age or older in comparison to the emergency use authorization for the Pfizer vaccine, which goes to a younger age. Now, what's up with that? And do we really have two things out there now? Well, in a sense, yes, we do, because in addition to the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson EUA vaccines, we still have the Pfizer EUA vaccine that can be administered to younger patients than Comirnaty can. But Comirnaty, in its packaging, makes clear that the two are synonymous with each other. The formulation is the same for both of these vaccines. So what we say about Comirnaty should apply to the other and vice versa. But if you've listened to the show any number of times, you know that FDA is not primarily a technology regulation organization. They are primarily a marketing claims regulation organization. And so what you're allowed to say about what it is that you want to sell, and this applies to devices as well as biologics and everything else, what you want to say about it is what is under scrutiny. So what you're allowed to say has to be demonstrated by testing. And today we're going to look a little bit at what did get tested, what didn't get tested, and what still has to be tested post-market. Because with Comirnaty, what we're actually looking at is a healthy dose of post-market surveillance. So if you've ever heard us talk, whether devices or anything else, about post-market surveillance, you're going to get a look at what post-market surveillance for this vaccine is going to look like as we go through these documents. So let's go down. Of course, you've got to tell us, says FDA, about your changes, any changes that happen. But I want to get down to some other parts here. This has to do with the pediatric requirements around the vaccine. FDA says we are deferring submission of your pediatric studies for ages younger than 16 years for this application because the product is ready for approval for use in individuals 16 years of age and older, and the pediatric studies for younger ages have not been completed. So they're saying, hold on, we're not saying no to the pediatrics. It requires more research, and that research hasn't been done. We're going to give you approval for the older age groups. Here are those pediatric studies. These are required studies. This is an obligation on the part of Pfizer and BioNTech to complete these studies. The first one is a deferred pediatric study to evaluate the safety and effectiveness in children 12 through 15. The second one is children 6 months to 12 years of age. And the third is under 6 months of age. If you look at the study completion dates, they're in 2023, 2024, and the final report submissions 2023, 2024, late in the year. They note that the company has fulfilled the pediatric study requirement for ages 16 through 17, but we'll talk more about that in a second. There's some really interesting risk-benefit analysis. You've heard us talk throughout about benefit-risk analysis and its role. You're going to see FDA doing benefit-risk analysis within this document. Now, FDA has also said that the basic requirements for post-market surveillance aren't going to be enough. There are risks, especially, they say, serious risks of myocarditis and pericarditis, and they're looking at this question of subclinical myocarditis. Myocarditis, inflammation in the heart, pericarditis, inflammation in the tissue surrounding the heart. And so FDA is asking, what does this really look like? We know it's there, but we don't know what it's doing long term. We don't know if we've caught all the cases. We also don't know the lower end of cases, the subclinical ones. We don't yet know what's going on there. And so they want surveillance surrounding that, and they have requirements specifically surrounding that. Again, they say, you are required to conduct the following studies. The first one is, in the US, an evaluation of the occurrence of myocarditis and pericarditis following administration of Comirnaty. Now we're going to have to wait a little while. That one is not going to be complete until 2025, so we're a number of years out. The final report submission due October 31st of 2025. Then the second study here in Europe, a very similar one, to evaluate the occurrence of myocarditis and pericarditis following administration of Comirnaty. And this has a similar time frame, except the final report due a year earlier in 2024. And a third study on the natural history of myocarditis and pericarditis, which will be one due in 2024. They're also interested in what are called the sequelae of myocarditis, which would be the condition consequent to the actual infection. So does it result in any other things? And that will be a study not due until 2026, final report in 2027. So it's going to take some time to evaluate this. We're going to talk in a little bit about what they have seen with myocarditis and pericarditis in a different document. There's also a study being requested to look at this subclinically in a subset of participants ages 5 through 15 years of age, which, as you'll see in a minute, is a very interesting age group. And finally, in 16 through 30 years of age. So, as you can tell, the kinds of things that the agency is still asking questions about, pediatrics in general, and specifically this question of myocarditis and pericarditis. They're also interested in pregnancy. They have studies that they are looking forward to having to do safety studies of pregnancy and infant outcomes due in 2025. Also, immunogenicity, the effectiveness of the vaccine, and safety of lower dose levels. So can we give less of it and still get an effect in individuals 12 through 30 years of age? Obviously, reducing the dose is usually a good thing, and so they're going to be studying that. They're also looking at its use within the VA and within Kaiser Permanente, of course, a very large hospital system there in California. I'll note at the bottom that this is signed by Marion Gruber. That name will become very important as we go just a little bit later, because of course Dr. Gruber's resignation has been announced recently. So as of the end of the year, he will no longer be with the agency. Interesting. We'll talk about that news item in just a little bit. But before we go there, let's look at the package insert for Comirnaty. We're going to look just a bit at this because it talks about the population for the analysis upon which Comirnaty is approved. And that population includes 36,621 participants. Now, of course, this doesn't count the millions upon millions of people who have received the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine throughout the last year plus. But it does specifically for this purpose of approval include these 36,000, about half of which received a placebo and about half of which received the vaccine. They had no prior evidence of SARS-CoV-2, and the enrollment period was within 2020. So this isn't really including the Delta variant. Of course, now we're hearing all the news items about the Delta variant. But our focus today is what is Comirnaty approved for? What was it studied for? And there you have it. That's the age groups and the period when it was being used, and of course, what variants were circulating during that period. I want to take you now to this document, which is FDA's summary basis for regulatory action. This is really interesting because it gives FDA's thought process behind its approval. And we're going to focus on the parts that are of interest. Of course, there's a lot of justification here for the vaccine and all of the stuff that goes into it. What's interesting here, again, as we said, pediatrics, pericarditis, and myocarditis are the things that the agency is looking at. They're going to be looking at for the next 5 years, roughly. The post-EUA safety surveillance reports received by FDA and CDC identified serious risks for myocarditis and pericarditis following administration of Comirnaty. The reporting rates have been higher among males under 40 years of age than among females and older males, and have been highest in males 12 through 17 years of age. Right in those words, I think you can see why the FDA is asking for the post-market surveillance that they've asked for, and why all the focus is going to pediatrics, especially males, especially with respect to myocarditis and pericarditis. And the onset of this is usually particularly following the second dose. While some cases are associated with intensive care support, it doesn't look like that's the case for most people. But what we don't know is the long-term outcomes here, and that's why FDA is asking for these studies. What I found particularly interesting is right now there is no mechanism of action that has been identified for myocarditis and pericarditis. The agency acknowledges that it's happening, that the risk is increased, but there's not yet any evidence as to what would be the cause. And so that's why this is being studied. I think the FDA is being very transparent about it. They're laying out the safety for the vaccine. They're also laying out some of the risks associated with it for these groups of people. And they say these safety findings of increased risk for myocarditis and pericarditis led to warning in section 5.2, where they just simply said this can lead to increased swelling. I had to smile when I saw that because, of course, this is what happens when FDA reviews something. They'll identify risks, and if they can't rule them out, they'll generally ask you to warn against them in some way or change your labeling. This is true of biologics, of drugs, of devices. So if you're in the business of delivering medtech, you know that this is something you're going to run into as a part of your review process. It's not particularly cause for alarm. It's just what FDA does when they say, hey, there's something we have to look at here. You haven't proven it. We're going to have to take a look at that part later on. Please warn against it. Now, these outcomes are important parts of the pharmacovigilance plan that FDA has asked for, or rather required. And they also say this. So if you have other concerns, or your friends have other concerns about the vaccine, it's worth noting that FDA has said vaccine-associated myocarditis, pericarditis is the most clinically significant identified risk. They've looked through all this stuff and they're saying this is the thing that we are looking at. And then FDA did what is a benefit risk analysis. This is near and dear to my heart because we often talk about this with respect to clearances and approvals and things with FDA. And as they looked at the benefit versus the risk of the vaccine, they used modeling to help identify what the risks and the benefits were associated. They took a conservative approach. They went beyond the passive self-reporting VAERS system, and they estimated excess risk higher than you would find by looking at the vaccine reporting system. So they actually made the risk higher than some of the publicly available data might look. So they're taking a conservative approach to it. And then they, with the Delta variant, knowing that it was there and coming as they were doing this analysis, they actually estimated a diminished vaccine effectiveness. And with all of that in, they found that it was still, for most age groups and for men and women, for most age groups, it was generally the benefits outweighed the risks. Now, one caveat to that, if we look for males ages 16 to 17, and of course we're not looking underneath age 16 right now, that's for future studies, the model predicts that the benefits of prevented COVID-19 hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and deaths would clearly outweigh the predicted excess risk of vaccine-associated myocarditis and pericarditis under the most likely scenario. But they do note this, that the predicted excess cases of vaccine-associated myocarditis and pericarditis would actually exceed COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths under the worst case scenario. So what they're saying is, as we get to those younger ages, especially in males, you're going to see a lot of myocarditis and pericarditis, even when compared to the number of COVID hospitalizations. We're starting to reach parity in numbers, but not in severity, because they're saying the myocarditis and the pericarditis clear up. What they seem to be saying is, we're less worried about that than we are about that person contracting COVID and going to the hospital with that. So what they're saying is not all hospitalizations are equal, even though in terms of numbers, in that age group, they are beginning to reach parity. Again, this is not medical advice. We're simply telling you what FDA has said here. And they're doing a great job of evenly unpacking what they're finding with the vaccine. So with that, they say we're going to warn against it, which they have done. They've required the warnings, and they're going to continue to do this research. It's worth noting they also mention anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shock. This is common to putting things into your body, right? Some people will have anaphylactic shock response to it. That's why when dosed, folks are often asked to sit there for half an hour, to see if there's any response to it. That's not unique to Comirnaty. That's just something that happens with vaccination and, in fact, putting things into a person's body. So with that, this is just a little overview of what's going on. Everything else here, very, very normal, what you would expect to see in an approval, post-marketing requirements when the reports are due. And these are the kinds of things that we would normally expect to see in a approval. So focusing today just on the things that FDA has called out. We've often said that we really appreciate how FDA does things. A lot of times, we don't. Like if we're going for an approval and it's taking time, we don't appreciate it. But we have to say what we see FDA doing, the information they put out, they really seem to be doing a good job of it. So still have to tip our hat to what the agency has done here and thank them for it. That brings us to an interesting point, though, because where we're going to go next for just a moment is this Washington Post article that I'm going to throw an excerpt of here onto the screen. And this, from a few days ago, 2 FDA officials who oversee coronavirus vaccine reviews to depart. Marion Gruber, who you saw signature was on the approval, who leads the Office of Vaccines Research and Review, will depart the FDA at the end of October. Philip Krause, Gruber's deputy, will leave the agency in November. It may be typical to have somebody leave and have their deputy take over. In this case, Gruber and the deputy both leaving. The paper, the Washington Post, notes that the FDA and its vaccine office has been at the center of the government's effort to speed the coronavirus vaccine and other therapies, and they're under considerable pressure to approve vaccines for children under the age of 12. A decision that probably remains months away, says the Washington Post, but with what we just looked at together in the FDA's actual documentation, the studies looking at safety and efficacy in those age ranges aren't due for years. Will the FDA stop midway through and say, okay, we've got enough evidence to unblind this somewhere in the middle? That remains to be seen. Also, the Biden administration has been pushing booster shots, and FDA has very clearly said, wait, we're not saying that yet. For immunocompromised individuals maybe, but not in general. So that is an open issue that's created some tension. And we'll see where this goes. But again, FDA have been doing a great job on this. And if it seems a little bit like hard to understand, well, the FDA is just laying out very, very clearly what all the pros and cons are. So we're thankful for that. Now that's from the CBER side, Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. What we have next is just a little bit of news from CDRH. This is the division that we at Into Being work the most with, Center for Devices and Radiological Health. They're always trying to make improvements, and one of the improvements we just heard about recently is they've taken a pilot dashboard and made it widely accessible. Here's the email from FDA. We've now made online progress tracking available to everyone who submits a traditional 510K. We can keep you updated about CDRH pre-market online features. If you subscribe to our mailing list, of course we are. And we've had submissions that have gone through this dashboard when it was in its trial period, and it's been really cool. So there's a place where you can get to this through the FDA's webpage. And here's a little picture of what it looks like. So they've got your K number at the top left corner there, what your firm name is, what the device name is, what FDA offices, teams, and reviewers are involved in the review process, and where you are in the progress. This is a great one because we just got it approved recently, but it also shows you the history of the device, how much time FDA has spent on their holds and on their review, and so forth. And so this has been a really neat tool. Got to tip our hat to the agency for rolling this out. Now available for any traditional 510K. So if you've submitted a traditional 510K, you have access to this. And it gives you a much easier way to see where you are in the process with the agency than previously. You used to have to sit there and sort of guess and calculate yourself. Okay, how long does FDA have left for their review? How long do I have left from my response to them? Now it's all in the dashboard, which is a great step in the process. That's some of the news from CBER and CDRH. Next up, it's that time again. The $2,500 quarterly MedTech Crossroads pitch party. Now, of course, as you've heard us say before, we don't call it a pitch competition because the companies we talk with are in different verticals. They're working on different things. It would be hard to do a head-to-head-to-head comparison of these companies. But what we can compare and contrast and talk about and let our judges reflect on is how impressed they were with the presentation, how much potential they think the company has, what they liked, what they didn't like. We've heard over and over again that some of the constructive criticism has been as useful as anything to some of the participants in this. And the plan for this has, as it always has been, US-based MedTech startups are eligible for consideration regardless of their stage. Each startup gets 10 minutes at the end of a show, and you're going to hear this quarter's first pitch in just a few minutes. At the end of the quarter, at the end of September, our judges will review the pitches. They'll tell you what they liked, what they didn't like, make some suggestions, and then they will tip their hat to one of those startups. Into we'll write that startup a check for $2,500, and of course, Into stays out of the voting, and we recuse ourselves of that. Pitch party at medtechcrossroads.org. Companies interested in participating, send your pitch deck to that email. We'll get you in the rotation, and presentations are limited to 10 minutes. PowerPoint format. We need the areas of problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, business model, competitors, and the ask, or the functionally equivalent areas, because those are the things that our judges want to hear about so that they can evaluate. Our judges, speaking of our judges, Andy Rader, who is the managing partner of Evergreen M&A Partners. Evergreen is a really, really interesting company because they work with companies at all different stages, not just the perfect VC exits that went exactly textbook, which actually doesn't happen all that often. They know how to get value out of companies that are midstream and building value, but maybe didn't hit all the milestones they were hoping for. Andy's got a really cool thing going there. Dr. Nikki Kennedy, vascular surgeon, founder of Arbor Hive. Arbor Hive is targeted at doctors who want to be participants in the innovation process, but need to band together to learn best practices from each other. It's a big world out there. Arbor Hive's doing a great job of educating doctors about the innovation process. Jim Metzger, of course, Jim was on the show just a few weeks ago talking during our manufacturing month about Keystone Solutions Group. Keystone, one of the great manufacturers in the state of Michigan on the west side of the state there. Jim, the president and founder of Keystone Solutions Group. And Stacy Frankovich, the program manager at MedHealth. MedHealth has been a long time now cross-border initiative between Southeast Michigan and Southwest Ontario. That very important border focused on MedHealth, on not only the hospital systems, but also the innovators and the service providers and all the participants in the MedHealth cluster. So Stacy's also one of our judges, and they will be with us the last Friday in September to talk about these pitches that you're going to hear these next few weeks and share with us their thoughts. With that, we are coming to the moment that you have all been waiting for. I'm just going to check one thing here. We do have there was a question, before we get to the pitch party, there's a question about off-label use of the COVID vaccine. We did not talk about that today. Maybe something to be followed up, and Ken's a longtime listener of the show. So actually, Ken, if you've got a comment on off-label use of the COVID vaccine, I am more than happy to make you live since we know you here, and just let you tell us what you know.
Yeah, so Gene, there was an interesting article today, from NPR on the Michigan feed on there about the dangers that people face with the off-label use in terms of, saying they're immunocompromised or whatever, or, jumping ahead of, the CDC is actually not promote or approved, the booster shots and things, right? So it's a pretty interesting article. I would think you would find it quite interesting to look at that, people are taking some risks here that they probably shouldn't be doing.
That's interesting. And we see that on all sides, right? People sort of getting a sense and then running off in a direction on all sides. And in this case, I think what you're saying, Ken, is that increased reports of people wanting the booster, thinking it's going to help them. FDA and CDC haven't said that yet, saying they're immunocompromised just to get it, and and we'll see where that goes. It's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up. Great. Always appreciate Ken Spencer from U of M's MCirc listening in here on the show. Thank you, as always, for your participation, Ken. We're going to go back to the pitch party. We've told you about it, and now it is that time. I want to welcome our guest, Gina Adams of Wareologie, to the show. Gina, you can make your audio and video live. There she is. Got the backdrop behind and everything. How are you doing today, Gina?
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jean. It's great to be here. Hello, everybody.
It's great to have you. Gina, we're going to put 10 minutes on the clock, and we're going to let you take it away with your presentation. Go ahead and actually bring that up so we have that all set to go.
Okay, I will. I have two monitors here, so bear with me for a second.
No, you're fine.
Did it work?
There we go. And there's presentation mode, and we'll be good to go.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everybody. I'm Gina Adams with Wareologie. We develop hardware to empower individuals with physical challenges to lead the most fulfilling life possible. And we launched in 2019, but we've been doing some research for over 4 years, really diving into the challenges that people face. And with COVID-19, our team took a deep dive to look at how people with disabilities were disproportionately impacted by COVID. And it was pretty alarming to see and recognize how many people actually were missing physical therapy, of course. But Wareologie, we're really about innovation, and the ology part of our name comes from our approach to design and development, where we partner with end user experience type of R&D so that we're able to develop the most innovative as well as functionally and high performing products. My background is in the apparel industry in product development, where I worked for the North Face and really have a high standard of product and understand the value of functionality. And really the company, the idea stemmed from probably over 30 years ago when I used to teach people with disabilities how to ski in Colorado. And at the time is when I was working for the North Face, and I knew then that clothing made for able-bodied people just does not do justice for people that are struggling. And later, although my career path took a different trajectory in that apparel space, I witnessed the impact of Parkinson's on my own father, and seeing how such a degenerative illness impacts somebody not only physically but emotionally. And chances are somebody, or maybe you yourself have had surgery, and just that short interim of recovery and even the loss of independence can be really devastating to the individual as well as caregivers, such as my mom, who spent anywhere from 14 to 30 hours a week caring for a loved one. So Wareologie, we're really excited to be here today to share our findings last year. As I mentioned, we discovered 90 million physical therapy appointments are missed annually. And the negative impacts, of course, with compounding health issues related to immobility, whether it's muscle atrophy or breathing and incidences of pneumonia are really complicating individuals. And the fact is that this lack of access, if you're recovering from surgery, the problem is transporting, right? Whether you're in a hospital or in ACU, people cannot physically get out of bed. And so if you have to transport them down to a rehab center, we know that, there's a tremendous amount of energy taken, and people are really don't have the energy. And there's also a sense of course, privacy, right? If you're wearing your hospital garments and having to transport. It's a pretty massive problem. And when we looked globally, there's 283 million surgeries. We know that the disability population in the world is about 10%. And in the US alone, there are 50 million people faced with a disability. And I think that number is actually underrepresented because you have people that are aging that simply attribute their, whether it's arthritis, but they're like, oh, I'm not disabled, because sometimes there's a stigmatism to that, right? And so people will say, oh, well, I just have neuropathy. And so, yeah, 50 million people, but we know 10,000 people retire every day. And these are people that take pride in their appearance and their independence. And so Wareologie is really about helping people age in place and live life to the fullest. So we develop proprietary innovations, as well as we've now expanded to add these other assisted devices that can help people regain, once they're out of bed and recovering from the hospital, now they can go home and live independently. Our first, last year, we stepped up to the plate. There was a COVID-19 Maker Challenge that was sponsored by Challenge America. And the call to action was from a senior living center that needed some way to administer physical therapy to their patients who were quarantined. Now, we know that, as I mentioned, this goes far beyond just quarantine patients, that 90 million people do not have access to physical therapy. So our solution were the portable parallel bars. And this unique device, I'm proud to say that Wareologie is the one of the first companies to partner with the VHA Innovators Network to bring a product from concept, which was almost exactly a year ago. It was this drawing, not this drawing, but it was a drawing, to full prototype development. And we are currently embarked in a R&D user experience program with the VHA Innovators Network at the Hunter's Home McGuire, Richmond, Virginia VA Center. So lots going on within a very short period of time. So the idea is parallel bars, as we know, is a common device used for all sorts of therapy, but primarily any type of standing, balancing, and gait training to get people moving. So if people can't get to the parallel bars, there is a problem. So our solution is to take a very common device and make it retractable. So it folds up easily, like a suitcase does on wheels. And we are bringing a safe, portable device directly to the patient bedside. So now you can get people up, standing, and moving much quicker and safer. The partnership with the VHA Innovation Network, which is actually abbreviated for INET, is this incredible program that I recommend any entrepreneur who's currently watching to register. They are currently taking applications for next year's cohorts, because this has given us, again, my background's in apparel and product development, and I'm really excited about it, but I'm not a clinician. So now we have this prototype in Richmond undergoing clinical studies with different departments so that we can optimize the usability of the product and really fine tune the development so that we can actually propel this innovation and commercialize it in 2022. We couldn't have done this, though, of course, without the VHA, who is providing both human capital as well as um, actually purchasing our prototypes to help this development get off the ground, as well as I should mention, of course, the Centropolis Accelerator, which is here based in Detroit, and they've helped partner us with world-class engineers so that we can look at how we can um, refine our product and make sure that we have all of the inputs that the VA is requesting from us, and so that we know that we're delivering a product that is going to revolutionize patient care so that clinicians, whether you're occupational therapist, physical therapist, nurse's aide, that you can help administer this vital physical therapy directly to your patient. Current options, they're not portable. I find it remarkable, but current current parallel bars are stationary. So you have to transport the patient directly to the clinic to use them. Sometimes we've heard they're using walkers, which aren't very stable. A lot of times it'll take either several nurses, aides, and clinicians to actually get the person out of bed, or they will use a Hoyer lift, which, if you know those systems, they're really pretty demoralizing, the way they transport patients from beds into a wheelchair. And then, of course, there's just so much time that is taken from that transport to getting the patient to the rehab clinic, and then they're exhausted. I mean, just that transportation alone. So we're really excited. This will bring benefits, of course, to the clinicians, saving time. You can increase your actual therapy time with the patient, as well as improve patient outcomes. For the patients, they're going to receive access to therapy so that they can recover faster. They can conserve their strength. There's, of course, can preserve their energy for the actual therapy, and then they can return home quicker, because we all know that at the end of the day, that's where we want to be. And then, of course, for our health systems, the benefit is that we can reduce hospital stays. There is data supporting that early therapy does increase the chances of somebody with an early discharge. So we can look at improving, of course, reducing the healthcare costs, as well as improving efficiencies, because now the device can be disinfected really easily. It's a really clean, simple design. And so clinicians can move fluidly from patient to patient and save time. Now, I mentioned that we develop proprietary devices, and it would be a huge miss if I didn't share, of course, our proprietary buttons to buttons magnetic adapters, which we launched with in 2019. Sold in sets of 9. This is a way that people can retrofit your own wardrobe into, or your own shirts, I should say, into a magnetic closure, so people can regain that vital activity of daily living, of self-dressing. Now, we have received our patent on buttons to buttons, and our portable parallel bars are currently patent pending. Now, the US physiotherapy market is a 21.4 billion market in the US. And our beachhead market are the VAs, where we've already received not only purchase orders for our prototypes, but in order for 100 units. And then we'll also be, of course, soliciting to rehab facilities, and then, of course, skilled nursing homes who put the call to action out in the first place in need of this device. It's the right timing. We know that in-home therapy is vital. It's on the rise. People like the convenience and the safety of that. And of course, our path to success. I mean, we've been at this for 3 years in terms of our company is established. We've had over 96,000 in revenue. We've raised 330K in development costs. And then moving forward with the VA, we've actually now been able to reach over 30 of the 2,000 VAs. So we have customers ready for our new developments, and we're embarked in the FDA process. So I am looking forward to looking at that new process that you were mentioning, Jean, earlier.
Gina, I gotta put a little pause on it because we're actually a couple minutes over time
Oh,
here,
we're
over our 10
over.
minutes. Oh,
Okay.
I do want,
Wow. That went
yeah, it
fast.
goes fast. I
Sorry.
do want to give you an opportunity to put a slide up with your contact information, which I'm sure you have somewhere to the end there,
Yeah. Oh,
so that
that went
people know how
really
to get a
fast.
hold of you.
I was not paying attention to the time. Sorry about that.
You got a
So,
lot of good stuff there.
oh, there you go. So
There it
please
is.
contact us because really our ask is not only, yeah, we're raising capital, but we're just looking for some distribution partners as well as any procurement or wholesale distributors. So thank you very much. Please check us out at Wareologie.com and go straight to our portable parallel bar product page, and you'll see all of the exciting videos if you'd like to see how the product works. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Gina. Now, as I told you before, and as our audience knows, we don't have active questions for each of the pitches. We sort of leave a level playing field for the judges to work from each of the recordings. But there's one question I always ask our pitchers every time, and that is to give them another opportunity to tell us about the passion that drives you. I think you alluded to this at the beginning. I'd love for you to just take a minute as we ask all of our presenters. What is the passion that drives you to do this? Because doing a startup isn't an easy thing to do.
Well, thanks for acknowledging that because you're absolutely right. It is the people. I've been researching for 3 to 4 years, and this is a massive problem. Excuse me. um, but yeah, the reason I'm getting choked up is I did lose a friend this week. And so because of complications and contracting pneumonia while in the hospital. And so I am I'm passionate about this because I know that we can help. And these simple solutions, I mean, I've pitched against people who are raising millions of dollars for research. And the reality is we have simple solutions that can help people tomorrow. I mean, the prototypes are here, buttons to buttons. We commercialized 2 years ago. We're selling globally. And it's really, we get, it's the comments that people say, hey, thank you so much, this really helped my dad. And that's what keeps me going.
Thank you for that, Gina, and I'm sure I speak for our whole listening audience when I say condolences on your loss, and thank you for what you're doing. Look,
Thank you for this opportunity and to reach this really insightful, intelligent group. I've been watching you for over a year now, since you've been every Friday. It's a great 2 hour, or it's a great program, 2 o'clock. It's on my permanent calendar. So thanks, Jean, for the opportunity.
well, I appreciate having you here. We appreciate our audience being here. It's a skeleton crew today because of the Labor Day holiday, but I hope everyone has a great one, and folks will catch this in reruns as well. So I thank you, Gina, for being here, and thank you all for being part of MedTech Crossroads today. I'm going to leave about 30 seconds in case anybody has any general questions, comments for the show. We'll look for hands that may go up for that. But not seeing those, I want to thank you for being here. Have a great Labor Day holiday. We'll see you on the flip side next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day, everybody.